Hi, hello, welcome. My name is Michaela. I'm a PhD student at the University of Tübingen, but I'm originally from New Zealand. My husband and I moved to Germany in December of 2021 for me to do my PhD studies in Germany. And yeah, welcome to my YouTube channel. I basically document my life here in Germany, what we are getting up to, our travel, but mostly my PhD life. That's one of the reasons I started this channel, was to be able to document my PhD journey, and at the end of the whole thing be able to go back and look back at everything from like doing an application, applying for scholarships here in Germany, all of the writing processes that I'm going through and the different ways that I'm learning and growing as an academic. And yeah, I hope that you find something on this channel that is helpful. I basically started this because I really struggled to find anything on YouTube that was related to academia in Germany for an international person that is English speaking. I could be wrong, there could be a lot of stuff in German, there could be stuff in other languages, I genuinely don't know. But when I was looking for stuff based in English, I really struggled to find anything, and YouTube is normally where I turn to for like crafts and baking and travel tips and anything that I really want information from. I normally go to YouTube for it. I know the new thing is to go to like TikTok and Instagram and all that stuff. I'm still a YouTube girly. I'm definitely someone who wants a long form video where I can just have someone sit down and explain it to me or show me if they're traveling. Like, I don't just want a 90-second video. So that's the main reason I started my YouTube channel. And funnily enough, I've made a few PhD videos. I made one on my journey to starting a PhD in Germany. It was like 40 minutes long. It was one of the longest videos I did right at the beginning of my channel. And I did like an ultimate frequently asked questions for studying in Germany. And I've done a few other things as I've discovered stuff along the way. But for some reason I didn't even think about the fact that a video on how I actually applied for my PhD might be helpful until somebody pointed it out. So I'm gonna put the comment on here. Thank you so much for reaching out and asking me to make this video, because you're right, it is really helpful and it's something that I wish I had have had, but I completely forgot to do it. So thank you for pointing it out. And yeah, that's basically what this video is going to be about, is walking you step by step through how I applied for a PhD in the humanities in Germany. There are a few caveats to say at the beginning of this video. If you watched my frequently asked questions about a PhD in Germany video, I can link it up the top so that you can watch that. But I mentioned that there are different ways that you can do a PhD in Germany, and obviously I can only speak to the way that I'm doing a PhD, and it might be slightly different if you're doing it one of the other ways. But if you're doing it down one of the other tracks, or if you're in something that's not history or not humanities, I don't know. I also only know from my university, and I mean, every UK university that I applied to before I was considering coming to Germany all had different application processes. I mean, some of them were similar, and then as soon as you get to the scholarships, that's where it's different, but some of them were completely different in what they needed from you. And so I can also only speak to my experience at Tübingen, but also my experience from 2 years ago. So again, I'm not entirely sure what it is now, but there are a few things that I will recommend that you should go and find, because those things should be able to tell you about your own university and if that's what it's like at your university. So there are 3 steps to this process that I did. Obviously there's going to be a few other ones if you're adding in any type of funding, or if you're doing it down a route that's part of a project, you're probably going to have an interview with that project, and I didn't have to have that. And so there are different things that might be added onto, but if you're literally asking about the application process itself, this is the way that I did it. And the first thing that I did was reach out to a supervisor, because you can't really apply to a PhD program without having a supervisor in mind. I know with America and Canada, they're 5 to 6 year programs, and even though you start with about 2 years of classes, you still have to apply through a supervisor. And it's the same thing here in Germany, where you have to apply with a supervisor in mind. and with a project in mind. And so I was fortunate enough to have an idea of what I wanted to do for my PhD, and I'd already written a rough proposal, and I ended up reaching out to a couple of people in Germany with this proposal. If you want the full story, I actually applied to Munich first. I reached out to a scholar that I highly respect, and I've read a lot of his work, and I reached out to him and said, hey, my name's Michaela. I'm from New Zealand. I'm trying to come to Germany for a PhD. I'd love to study in Munich. Here is a rough idea of what I'd love to do for my PhD. I really admire your work and I'd love to work with you. Do you have any thoughts? And that's kind of the approach that I took, because I knew that Germany doesn't do the same thing with big applications to the university where you don't know if you're going to get in or not. It might be different for undergrad, but for PhD at least, if the supervisor accepts you, you're kind of in, quote unquote in, as long as your grades are good. Obviously you can't have failed a master's and then try to apply for a PhD, or you can't have not done the requirements. But if you're talking about the actual application and you meet all of the requirements, as long as the supervisor accepts you, it should be relatively smooth. So I reached out to this supervisor in Munich, and he mentioned, hey, this is a really interesting project, but it's currently away from what I'm researching at the moment. And so what I do is I'd actually recommend you reach out to this person and this person. And he sent me about 5 names, I think, but 2 of them were the top of the list. And 2 of them were people that I had read some work from, and they were also cities that I was interested in applying to. One of them was actually Berlin as well, but they'd put a temporary closure on their PhD while they revamped it, and so they weren't taking any new students for a couple of years, and I wasn't wanting to wait, obviously, when I could apply somewhere else. And so the 2 universities were Bonn and Tübingen, and I reached out to the 2 people, and both of them loved my topic, which is super exciting to have. Obviously it's very different when you're applying to a project and there's a set topic and you kind of have to propose what you would do with that topic, and then you go through an interview and you have a panel of people who ask you questions. I imagine it would be a little bit like a mini Viva. Obviously it's not a Viva because you haven't done the research yet, but you have to apply for why you'd be good at that job. I didn't have to do that. I basically had to send off my proposal to these 2 people, and we worked through it, and both of them gave me quite different feedback, both positive feedback, but different ways that I could take my project, and I worked on it with both of them. And then I found out that you don't have to apply to multiple different universities and wait for which ones you got accepted to and then choose one. You basically get accepted to whichever ones you apply to as long as you meet the requirements. And so I met the requirements, and so both of them said, okay, before you put in the time to apply, you actually just have to choose. And I went back and forth and eventually decided on Tübingen, mostly because of the feedback that I got from my supervisor, but also just looking into the type of city it was, the type of researchers who were coming through, the general academic vibe, for lack of a better word, is what I preferred at Tübingen, which is why I came here. And so that's basically what I did for this first step, was reaching out to the supervisor, and I worked on the proposal with him until it got to a point that we were happy with it for an application to the university. The second step, which I found kind of strange coming from New Zealand, there might be other countries that do this, but we definitely don't do this in New Zealand, and I talked about it in the FAQ video as well, where there's different levels of enrollment. And so at least when I applied, and especially at least in Tübingen, I don't know if it's the same at every other German university, but you can apply to the faculty and only be a student of the faculty and not a student of the university. And so you basically say, this professor in this faculty wants to supervise this project, and you have to write a proposal, which I'd already done with the supervisor, and I can't remember how many pages it was. I can stick it up on the screen, but it will also probably be different university by university depending on how detailed they want that proposal to be. But I wrote the proposal, and then I had to fill out a big form to say I want to apply to the faculty, and that was basically just I'm applying to work in the philosophy faculty. But I did have to write in like a general application form of who I was, where I was living in New Zealand at the time, emergency contacts, my university degrees, and basically just saying who I was to make sure that I fulfilled the requirements. And so when I did that, I also had to fill out a section of why I was coming to Tübingen, why that supervisor, why my choice of study, and why I felt like it was a good fit for all of those questions. And I submitted that to the faculty, and when I got the acceptance from the faculty, they send you back a form saying yes, you're accepted here, and you can use that to get your visa, for example. The reason that that is a separate step in this whole thing is because, like I said, you can apply to the faculty without applying to the university. And what that means is that you can have access to the faculty and have access to your supervisor, and you can be a part of things, and I think you get an email, I'm not entirely sure, but you have some sort of relation with the university without actually being matriculated. So you don't pay fees, you don't get a student card to the best of my knowledge, you can go to the library but you can't take books out. It's a whole different system if you matriculate or if you don't matriculate, but it is one way of doing a PhD, is by not matriculating and just having access to the supervisor. I assume you do that if you're wanting to do it maybe part-time and not pay for fees the whole time, but I've also come from a country where I was paying about $10,000 a year to study, and so paying a 150 euro admin fee just to be enrolled is not a problem for me. Don't know about other people, and you can make that decision on your own, but I did decide to continue on to step 3 and enroll at the university. Obviously step 3 is a little bit more intense. You do have to do a formal application to the university itself, and you have to have that acceptance from the faculty already, and you have to upload that before you can properly apply to the university. And this application was a lot more similar to the other applications that I had done in Australia, in New Zealand, in the UK, and in Canada. I didn't actually apply in America, but I can imagine it would be a similar situation. But you basically have to fill in everything. So I had to fill out a CV. It was like a narrative CV, so you have to basically talk about your work life and how you came to your studies and how everything fits in. I also had to fill in all of my work experience in like a normal CV format. I had to fill in my university grades, which I also had to get transposed or translated to the German grading system because the New Zealand grading system is obviously different. I had to fill out all of my language requirements because at least in Tübingen, I think it's different for every university, but in Tübingen, depending on what degree you're working towards, I think you have to have 2 modern languages and then the language of whatever you're studying. So for example, I'm doing medieval history, so I had to have a certain level of Latin and then 2 modern languages. I did German, I've got a B2, and then I did up to bachelor's level of Spanish. And so I submitted my certificates for all of that, and thankfully it was accepted, and so I don't have to do any more qualifications. I do know some people who hadn't met the German level qualifications for Latin, and so they had to sit a course through the university. It's absolutely fine. It just means that you can't graduate until you fulfill that course, whereas I don't have to worry about it because I did it before I started. The other thing that other people might have to think about that I didn't have to think about was translations. Tübingen accepted anything that was in English or German. I don't know about French. I think some things have been accepted in French, but if you're coming from any other country, you do have to get a translation. I know a couple of my Brazilian friends had to get it formally translated into German, and that's like a formal translation. Like, you have to pay a formal translator who's approved to translate it for you. You can't just Google Translate or DeepL it, unfortunately. But that is one thing you'll have to look into, is if you need to get that translated or not. The other thing I had to fill out was a supervisory agreement or supervision agreement. Again, I'll put up a form on the screen so you can see what the Tübingen one looks like. But I did have to fill out a form with my supervisors basically saying that they are willing to take me on. They are planning to meet with me this many times a year, which is specific to the fact that I'm an international student because they have to agree to supporting me a certain level. I don't know if you have to do it if you're a domestic student. Somebody can tell me. But at least as an international student, they had to stipulate that they were meeting with me at least every 6 months. To be honest, we've put down on all of our forms that it's been fortnightly because I see my supervisor at least 2 to 3 times a week during term time for different events and everything, and we often just have slow comments here and there about things, like it dribbles through, and then I'll have my meeting about once a month. So that's never been a problem for me, but I do know that they do that for a reason, because there is a problem with international students never having met this academic before, moving their entire lives to the other side of the world, and then the supervisor just ghosts them for most of the year and they have one meeting a year. I know some people that have had that situation, and so I'm very thankful that my university is very specific about that and that they actually hold you to it. They need to make sure that you're staying in contact. And that was the majority of the application. There may be more things, like I had to submit my proposal again. I also had to submit the form for why I chose Tübingen and why my research is good for this university, but also why I chose to work with these supervisors. But the main thing that I will say is that there's a thing called a Promotionsforderung. It's basically like the university guidelines for doing a PhD in Germany. And I would 100% recommend reading this if you've at least passed level 2 and you're doing level 3. Like 100% read that now before you send in that application. Otherwise you can just use it to get used to what the university expects. Every single university is different in Germany, and the different expectations can be quite vast. So for example, in Germany, I didn't realize before I applied and started my PhD that every PhD in Germany is by publication, at least in the humanities, but every university does that different. So in Tübingen, I'm pretty sure that I have to publish at least 200 books of my thesis in order to achieve the title of doctor and have a proper doctorate. In Heidelberg, I'm pretty sure it's more, and in Berlin I think it's less. It depends on the university, and so going through this information sheet will really tell you what is expected of a PhD. How many pages do I have to do, or how many words, if that's the way they count it. Most people count by pages here in Germany, so I'd assume that would be on there, but it will tell you how many pages at least you'll need to fulfill. It'll tell you about the structure in terms of going to university seminars and colloquiums in the humanities. At least in my case, because I'm a PhD student, I have to present at the department seminar. I think it's once a year, just as like an update to show that you're staying on top of your research, but also telling other people in the department about your research and being able to receive feedback on it. But it will also go through the guidelines of what it means to be an enrolled student in the university, what's expected of you, all of that stuff. And so I would 100% recommend reading that before continuing on with the application, but it should also tell you exactly what is required of the application. But yeah, that's pretty much what I did. I sent it off, and a couple of days later, I think, I received a notification that it was being reviewed, and then I was accepted to the University of Tübingen. And from there, you do receive a ID card, you receive access to the university. It was only after that that I got my student email, so I don't know if that's connected to step 2 or step 3. But you basically are a fully enrolled student at the university, which is super exciting. I think it's really cool to actually be a part of the university and to get all of the emails and stay up to date with what's going on. But you also get all the student discounts, which is nice. I'm milking that for as long as I can, because I know obviously after the PhD phase, I won't have that anymore. But yeah, that's basically everything that I had, and I hope that that has kind of walked you through what an application to a German university looks like. It's obviously going to be different at every university, but like I said, these are the forms that I had to fill out at each of the different stages, and it was probably the fastest application that I had done between all of the different countries that I applied to. And I think that's related to the fact that as long as your supervisor's happy to supervise you and you meet all of the university requirements, you're pretty much accepted to the university. So I was very fortunate to have met all the requirements by the time I was applying. Like, I'd finished my Latin course, I'd done all of my languages, I had a supervisor who'd filled out all the forms for me, I had a proposal already. All of these different things that can take a bit of time, I had it all from the beginning, and so it was very, very quick for me. But again, I'd recommend just starting with step 1, reach out to supervisors, see what kind of university you can see yourself at, what kind of department do you want to be working with, what kind of people do you want to be working with, what environment do you want to be around, and then start reaching out to people. I know it can be really, really daunting as a master's student or just having finished your master's, reaching out to universities and being like, hey, I'm this person from the other side of the world who's completely disconnected. Or I don't know, if you're from France applying to Germany, or I don't know, any country really. I know it can be really daunting reaching out to these academics who've been in the business for such a long time, but it can also be really positive receiving that kind of feedback on your research and just seeing a proposal come to life. So yeah, I hope that helped. Obviously I can't speak to any other track, whether it's like going with a project or if you've got a job at the university. I imagine that the actual application would be quite similar. It's just the writing of the proposal and the interview that would be different. But yeah, I hope that helped. And if you do have any more questions, maybe there's something that I forgot, or maybe it's something that I didn't have to go through myself, please let me know below, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And as usual, I will see you with another video very soon. Bye!
I need to log off, I need to step back. Constantly online, causing me setbacks. Ooh. Every day see so many